Ha llegado la hora del terror. El reloj marca la medianoche, la hora más temida por aquellos que conocen las verdaderas pesadillas. Aquí, cada minuto que pasa te arrastra más profundamente hacia un universo dominado por horrores indescriptibles y terrores sin nombre. Las historias que escucharás romperán todas las barreras de tu imaginación, atrapándote en un ciclo infinito de miedo. No intentes huir. Esta hora es inevitable y el terror que despierta te seguirá por siempre. Highway 16 stretched slick and black under the late October sky, a ribbon unwinding toward Portland. Elias Vance felt the miles in his bones, a leaden fatigue settling deep after 3 relentless days negotiating contracts in Seattle. Home, his own bed. That was the siren call pulling him south. Then the Wayfinder, his usually placid dashboard guide, began its subtle rebellion. The screen stuttered, a digital tremor running through the displayed map, routes flickering into existence only to vanish like phantom roads. A premonition, cold and sharp, pricked the edges of his exhaustion. Exit upcoming, Black Creek Road, the Wayfinder announced, its synthesized voice jarringly serene. 10:42 p.m. glowed on the dash clock. Black Creek Road. Elias frowned, tapping the unresponsive touchscreen. This wasn't the artery home. The blue line, however, remained resolute, an insistent digital finger pointing away from the familiar. Perhaps congestion ahead, a snarl of brake lights unseen. The thought of shaving minutes off the 4-hour slog, escaping the ache blooming between his shoulder blades from the sedan's leather embrace, was a potent lure. Against the rising tide of unease, Elias flicked his indicator and veered onto the exit ramp. Black Creek Road plunged immediately into shadow. The smooth asphalt of the highway gave way to older, scarred pavement. The yellow dividing line a fractured memory. No sodium lamps cast their sickly orange glow here. Only the twin beams of his car slicing into a profound arboreal darkness. Ancient firs and cedars crowded the narrow shoulders, their high branches interlacing overhead, a skeletal canopy swallowing the moon. The silence pressed in, broken only by the crunch of tires on rough tarmac. His phone, nestled uselessly in the console, remained stubbornly dark. A digital second opinion was out of reach. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel. A flicker from the Wayfinder. The blue path vanished, then reappeared, skewed onto an intersecting line. Recalculating, the placid voice intoned. Prepare to turn right, 500 feet. Elias leaned forward, peering into the gloom. Ahead, barely discernible, was not a road, but a track. Little more than twin ruts dissolving into the pitch-black woods. No signpost marked this deviation. Impossible, he breathed, the sound swallowed by the car's interior. He reached to manually reroute, but the screen went dead, a blank obsidian rectangle. He stabbed at the power button. Nothing. Slowing, searching for any space to execute a 3-point turn, he found only sheer ditches flanking the crumbling asphalt. The forest held the road in a tight embrace. Then, the Wayfinder flared back to life, bathing the cabin in an eerie blue phosphorescence. The map depicted his car icon adrift in a sea of undifferentiated green. No roads, no towns, just the insistent blue line urging him onward. Proceed forward, 2.7 miles, the voice commanded, a subtle crackle now fraying its edges, like static on a distant frequency. The home button, the zoom function, both inert beneath his touch. His headlights snagged on motion deep within the tree line. A swaying branch, but the air hung utterly still, thick and breathless. The road twisted sharply left. As the beam swept the arc they illuminated for a fleeting microsecond, something tall and unnervingly pale standing amongst the shadowed trunks. It vanished before his mind could assign it form. A clammy sweat broke out on his palms, slick against the leather wheel. The Wayfinder pulsed erratically. Then the headlights faltered, dipping into near darkness before flaring back, only to dim again, longer this time. The night outside seemed to solidify, pressing against the glass. Ahead, a shape darted across the track, low, swift, impossibly fluid. Not animal, not human. A blur of wrongness. Elias's foot instinctively slammed the brake. The Wayfinder screen erupted in a frantic strobe. White, black, red, white. The voice returned, shredded by distortion, a digital scream. Stop! Vehicle, now! He was stopping, but not by choice. The engine note soured, sputtered, the RPM needle plummeting despite the pressure of his foot on the accelerator. The sedan coasted to a halt, dead center on the nameless track. He twisted the key, a futile clicking, then silence. Again, nothing. The dashboard lights flickered like dying fireflies and expired. Profound silence descended, absolute and suffocating, amplifying the frantic thunder of his own heart. Only the Wayfinder screen remained alight, no longer displaying a map, but a cascade of unreadable glyphs and racing numerals, painting the dashboard in shifting blue hieroglyphs. Then, movement. The overhead dome light began to pulse, on, off, randomly. Other interior lights joined the spectral disco, casting jerky shadows. A skittering sound whispered across the roof, delicate like dry claws on metal. It traced a path from rear to front, halting directly above his head. Elias held his breath. The scratching returned, louder, insistent. A concave depression bloomed in the headliner, pushing slowly downward. Something heavy was testing the roof. He scrabbled for his phone, lifeless, utterly inert. The scratching migrated, now rasping against the driver's side window. Against all instinct, Elias turned his head. Pressed flat against the glass was a face, or the suggestion of one. Elongated, bone-white, featureless, save for two abyssal sockets where eyes should have gleamed. He choked back a scream as it slid away. Then came the tapping, soft at first from multiple points at once, a rain of fingernails on glass and steel. The sedan vibrated subtly. The interior lights strobed faster, painfully bright. In the strobing glare, he saw them, more faces, pale and indistinct, crowding every window, their forms shifting like heat haze at the edge of the woods. The tapping escalated to rhythmic pounding. The Wayfinder screen cycled violently through colors: crimson, emerald, sapphire, blinding white. The distorted voice shrieked, "E-exit! Vehicle! Immediately!" A brutal impact slammed against the windshield, fracturing the safety glass into a starburst. Another blow widened the cracks. The pounding on the roof found a sickening beat. Thump, thump, thump. Each impact deepened the dents overhead. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. Empty back seat. Then, not empty. A condensation of shadow coalesced on the upholstery, deeper than the surrounding gloom, shapeless yet undeniably present, growing. The Wayfinder screen detonated in a shower of sparks and shattered plastic. The interior lights went berserk, a seizure-inducing flicker that bleached the world white. From the back seat, the shadow entity extended an unseen tendril. The whisper of glacial air touched the back of Elias's neck. Panic detonated within him. Elias ripped the door handle, tumbling out into the ditch, the impact jarring through his shoulder. Filth and decaying leaves filled his mouth. He scrambled upright, fueled by primal terror, and plunged into the woods, away from the strobing nightmare of his car. He didn't dare look back, but the sounds pursued him. The shriek of tortured metal as his sedan was violated, punctuated by a cacophony of clicks, wet whistles, and guttural utterances that scraped at the edges of language. Branches lashed his face. Unseen roots snagged at his ankles. Ahead, the oppressive trees abruptly gave way to a clearing. Moonlight silvered the skeletal remains of structures. An old mill, perhaps, or a forgotten factory complex. Ruined windows gaped like empty sockets. Rusted machinery lay like fallen idols. The clicking and whistling surged closer behind him. The derelict sanctuary or the consuming woods? He sprinted toward the nearest structure. A dark monolith against the bruised sky. A main door hung drunkenly from a single hinge. Elias squeezed through the opening into absolute blackness. The air hung thick with dust, mildew, and the ghost of industry. Water dripped with metronomic regularity somewhere in the cavernous space. His ragged breaths echoed off unseen concrete walls. He found a corner, pressing his back against the cold, rough brick, straining to hear over the frantic pulse in his ears. The pursuit sounds ceased abruptly. Silence slammed back in, more terrifying than the noise. Even the dripping water stopped. Then a dry, slithering sound from directly overhead. Scraping noises echoed from within the walls, closing in. Impossibly, his phone vibrated in his pocket. He fumbled it out. The screen glowed starkly. White text on a black field. 2 words, wrong turn. The screen flashed, illuminating the immediate area for a blinding instant, then died again. In that flash, he saw them, pouring through the shattered window frames like smoke, unfurling down the walls in ways that defied anatomy, reaching for him with fingers impossibly long and thin. He fled again, deeper into the decaying labyrinth, finding groaning metal stairs, ascending blindly, always upward. They flowed around him, beside him, their movements fluid nightmares glimpsed in peripheral vision. He burst onto the flat, graveled roof. Moonlight revealed a desolate panorama, crumbling parapets, empty voids where windows once were, stretching away into darkness. No lights, no roads, nothing. A disembodied voice, the Wayfinder's synthesized tone now amplified, echoed from the night itself. You have arrived at your destination. They emerged from the roof access hatch, flowed up the exterior walls like black liquid, coalesced from the shadows. Elias retreated, step by desperate step until his heel met the crumbling edge. 4 stories down, the concrete waited. Before him, the closing circle of wrongness. The choice was stark, immediate. He launched himself into the void. No impact. Instead, a gasp, eyes snapping open. He was gripping the steering wheel of his sedan, Highway 16 flowing beneath his tires. The dashboard clock glowed. 10:42 p.m. Ahead, the green sign for the Black Creek Road exit loomed, illuminated by his headlights. The Wayfinder screen, displaying his normal route to Portland, flickered once, briefly. Elias's foot mashed the accelerator. He shot past the exit ramp, heart hammering against his ribs, the image of the sign burning behind his eyes. He didn't slow, didn't breathe easily until the familiar glow of Portland surrounded him. The Wayfinder unit was the first casualty upon reaching his apartment, deposited deep within the outside dumpster. He drives now, often taking circuitous routes to bypass that stretch of Highway 16. He finds himself checking the rearview mirror with obsessive frequency, scanning the trees lining any road after dusk. Sleep offers little respite. Sometimes the clicking whispers return, seeming to emanate from just outside his window. And the question lingers, cold and persistent, in the quiet hours before dawn. Did he truly escape? Or is he eternally plummeting from that rooftop, trapped in the moment before impact, forever destined to awaken at 10:42 p.m., approaching the turn onto Black Creek Road? Certainty is a luxury he no longer possesses. Some paths once glimpsed cast shadows that never recede. The space on his dashboard where the Wayfinder sat remains conspicuously empty, a void he fiercely protects. An ice-shard sting of rain struck my cheek, shattering the day's reverie. My gaze lifted, tracing the bruised swell of clouds muscling across the sky, a low curse escaping my lips. This was meant to be catharsis, etched in footprints, a solitary communion with the wilderness to quiet the buzzing hive in my head. Instead, twilight bled prematurely into the trees. The air grew teeth, and the stark truth bit. The path had vanished behind me. My phone, drawn forth with a prayer born of desperation, offered only the cold comfort of absence. No service. The digital ghost grinned from the screen, mocking my sudden, profound isolation. Rain now fell not in drops, but in sheets, a relentless silver curtain descending. To blunder onward through the deepening woods, this sodden labyrinth courted disaster. My eyes strained against the murk, hunting for any cleft or overhang, any reprieve from the sky's onslaught. And then, a tremor of luminescence between the dripping boughs. Not the wild dance of fire, but something steadier, contained. Another soul lost to the storm. A ranger's outpost, impossibly distant. Hesitation prickled. Approaching unknown lights in this wilderness felt unwise. Yet the alternative, a night embracing hypothermia, was less appealing still. A distant rumble of thunder, like giants shifting furniture, decided for me. I plunged toward the light, branches whipping, the sodden earth sucking at my boots. Closer now, the glow resolved. Not a flickering campfire, but the warm, contained breath of electric light spilling from windows. Through the skeletal trees, a silhouette solidified. A small cabin. A wave of profound relief washed through me. warm despite the chill. Surely the occupant would grant sanctuary from the tempest. I broke from the tree line into a pocket of clearing. There it sat, hewn from logs, impossibly snug, emitting a buttery lamplight that seemed both refuge and snare. Smoke feathered from a stone chimney, a fragile promise against the bruised sky. I moved towards the door, acutely aware of my appearance. A drowned rat cloaked in mud and decaying leaves. A futile attempt to smooth my hair, brush off the worst, then drawing a breath that tasted of rain and pine. My knuckles met the solid wood. Silence stretched, taut as wire, before the groan of hinges. Framed in the doorway stood a figure seemingly carved from the forest itself. Ancient, weathered, crowned with a shock of silver hair that merged into a beard of formidable wildness. His eyes, chips of winter sky, held an unnerving focus, pinning me where I stood. Hello. My voice sounded thin, reedy. Terribly sorry. I seem to have lost my way. The storm. I gestured vaguely at the deluge. Might I possibly wait inside, just until it eases? The old man offered no immediate reply, his gaze traveling over me, an appraisal both thorough and detached. Just as the silence thickened into something unbearable, he spoke, his voice like stones tumbling in a creek bed, rough, yet not entirely hostile. "You'd best be inside," he rumbled. "No sense leaving you to the elements." Gratitude surged as he stepped back, motioning me in. Warmth enveloped me, thick with the scent of wood smoke and something else. Dust, dried herbs, time itself. The room was compact, dominated by a hearth where flames writhed merrily. Bookshelves crammed every vertical space, surfaces cluttered with strange artifacts. Carved bones, intricate knots of wood, stones that seemed to watch. Relics belonging more to a forgotten museum than a hermit's dwelling. "Thank you. Truly," I murmured, shuffling awkwardly, trying not to shed puddles onto the worn floorboards. "My name is Silas." He gave a curt nod. "Corbin, washrooms yonder. Might find you something dry." I nodded, escaping towards the indicated door. Toweling off the worst of the wet and chill, pulling on the offered clothes, coarse spun, smelling faintly of cedar and age, but blessedly dry. I couldn't dispel a growing unease. Perhaps it was merely the bizarre circumstance, or the cabin's eccentric hoard. But an electric tension hummed beneath the cozy surface, a feeling of imminence that tightened my nerves. Returning, I found Corbin settled in a deep, worn armchair near the fire's embrace, cradling a steaming mug. He gestured to another mug resting on a nearby table. "Sit," he commanded gently. "Drink. Drive out the cold." I obeyed, sinking into the opposing chair, my hands closing around the mug's welcome heat. The brew within was dark, intensely aromatic, an unfamiliar infusion of herbs that warmed from the inside out. After a companionable silence, punctuated only by the fire's crackle and the rain's drumming tattoo, Corbin spoke. "What errand brings you so deep into these woods, Silas? Few tread this far, fewer still alone. I took a thoughtful sip before replying, the tea loosening something within me. Needed solitude, I suppose. Life felt tangled. Hoped the quiet might unravel things. Corbin inclined his head, a gesture of ancient understanding. The wilderness clarifies, he murmured, his gaze drifting towards the flames. Strips away the unnecessary, but it demands respect. This forest, it probes the soul. A peculiar resonance in his tone made me straighten. What do you mean? His gaze snapped back to mine, sharp and penetrating. Tell me, Silas, what understanding do you possess of this place, its history? I shook my head. Very little. I'm not from these parts. A ghost of a smile touched Corbin's lips. No, I sensed as much. He leaned forward, his voice dropping, becoming conspiratorial. This place is woven from time itself, Silas. Its roots run deeper than memory. It keeps secrets. A chill, unrelated to my recent soaking, traced a path down my spine. Secrets? What kind? Corbin's eyes glinted in the firelight, the kind most are unequipped to comprehend. But you... He paused, studying me again. You carry a different air, a seeker's energy. You came looking for more than just a walk, didn't you? I opened my mouth to protest, but the denial died unborn. He saw truly. I had come seeking something undefined, an answer to a question I couldn't articulate. He nodded, my silence his confirmation. As I thought. Then perhaps, Silas, your misstep was no misstep at all. This forest provides. Often what is needed, rarely what is expected. He rose with surprising fluidity, moving to a groaning bookshelf. His fingers, gnarled as old roots, danced over spines before selecting a volume bound in scarred leather, heavy as stone. Here, he said, extending it. Perhaps this will illuminate. Hesitantly, I accepted the book. Its surface was cool, smooth beneath my fingertips. No title adorned the cover, only a complex sigil pressed into the leather. A tree whose branches intertwined with a sliver of moon. What is it? I asked, tracing the design. A chronicle, Corbin replied, of this forest, of those who've dwelled within it, those like myself, those who have witnessed. I looked up, meeting his gaze, a knot of apprehension and intense curiosity tightening in my stomach. Witnessed what? His expression remained inscrutable. Open it, he urged softly. Read. Afterwards, we shall see if you are prepared for the next passage. With hands that trembled slightly, I opened the book. The pages, thick and yellowed, whispered with age. Dense handwritten script flowed across them, punctuated by intricate, unsettling illustrations. As I began to decipher the text, the cabin around me seemed to recede. The fire's hiss, the rain's rhythm on the roof, all faded into a muted backdrop as the stories bled from the pages and into my mind. Tales of rites held under lightless moons, of beings shifting between shadow and substance in the deepest groves, of wanderers drawn into the wood's embrace and emerging, altered. How long I sat, immersed, I cannot say. Minutes stretched into an hour, perhaps more. When I finally surfaced, dragged back by a profound sense of dislocation, Corbin was watching me, his expression knowing. "Do you perceive now?" he asked, his voice quiet yet resonant. My throat felt constricted, my mouth desert dry. I'm not sure. These accounts, they cannot be literal, can they? Corbin's smile held both sorrow and vindication. Oh, they are truth, Silas, every syllable, and possessing this knowledge presents a threshold. A threshold? I echoed, the word sounding foreign on my tongue. He nodded. "You may depart. Return to the world you knew. Persuade yourself this was but the fever dream of a lost hiker encountering an eccentric recluse." He paused, his gaze boring into mine, demanding honesty. "Or you can remain, learn, become woven into something far vaster than your solitary self." My eyes fell to the book resting heavy in my lap, then lifted back to Corbin. Outside, the storm howled its fury. But within this small, impossible cabin, freighted with secrets and archaic lore, I felt poised on the brink of an abyss, or perhaps a beginning. What happens if I stay? The question hung in the air, barely breathed. Corbin's smile deepened, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Then, young Silas, your true path commences." As if summoned, thunder answered, a seismic crack that shuddered the cabin to its foundations. The lights sputtered, winked out, plunging us into absolute darkness for a heartbeat. When they flared anew, I gasped. The room was different, alive. Energy hummed in the very timbers. The artifacts on the shelves pulsed with a soft internal radiance. And Corbin, the man dissolved, flowing like smoke and shadow, coalescing into a form ancient, elemental, utterly other. "Enter," resonated a voice not of lungs and throat, but of earth and wind. The deep heartwood. Strangely, terror held no purchase, only a profound resonance, an inexplicable sense of homecoming. The choice, already made in some recess of my soul, now found voice. With a steadying breath, I met the gaze of the impossible being before me. "I will stay," I said. "Show me." The creature that was once Corbin inclined its impossible head, a flicker of something akin to satisfaction crossing its otherworldly features. "So begins the path," it intoned. And as the storm raged unabated outside, and the raw magic of the ancient forest surged around us, I took my first conscious step into a reality I had never dreamed existed. A world shimmering with wonder, sharp with danger, and boundless with potential. A bellow, thick and guttural, erupted precisely at 13 minutes before 8, shattering the quiet ritual of my solitary meal, some reheated, tragically flat lasagna. It wasn't thunder, it was mirth, raw and impossible, clawing its way up from the cellar depths. My fork slipped, a tiny metallic shriek against the plate's glaze. Below my feet lay the undercroft, sealed, double-bolted and padlocked for 6 dust-choked years. 40 acres of whispering pine offered no witness, save myself. The nearest soul slumbered 4 miles distant. Immobility seized me at my small kitchen table, a statue carved from sudden dread. Above, the fluorescent strip hummed its monotonous tune. Then the sound surged again, louder, distinctly male, a coarse, almost feral glee. A tremor began in my fingers, radiating inward. Beads of cold perspiration pricked my brow. The lasagna, moments before sustenance, became a paste of cinders on my tongue. 12 years I'd haunted these rooms. 6 years since Clara. Since the padlock clicked shut on the descent into her world. Her sanctuary, her chaos of pigment and canvas, resided down there. After the hushed finality of the funeral, I'd entombed it all. The stretched canvases, the stiffened brushes, the spectral forms half-born in oils. A shrine I couldn't bear to visit. The key, nestled in flannel within my nightstand drawer, remained a cold, unheld promise. That horrid joviality ricocheted off the plaster. My ribcage felt too small for the frantic drummer within. Shoving back from the table, the chair legs shrieked across the worn linoleum, a sound amplified by the suffocating hush. "Who's there?" The question emerged thin, frayed. Only the house replied, timbers groaning, a window pane rattling against a gust, the familiar nocturnal symphony. But this invasive mirth? Utterly alien, impossible. My own feet, leaden weights, dragged me toward the cellar door. The heavy brass padlock, dulled by time and verdigris, hung undisturbed. No fissure, no scratch marred the metal around the keyhole. It held fast, a 6-year vow of silence. Yet another wave of laughter broke against it, and this time syllables tumbled within the sound. Distorted, archaic phonemes vibrating up through the very soles of my shoes. Bile rose, hot and acrid. The key. I had to know. Had to confront this phantom. The stairs creaked under my urgent ascent. In the nightstand's shadowed recess, swaddled in faded cotton, lay the small, cold piece of metal. My fingers, clumsy with adrenaline, fumbled with the cloth. From below, the sound intensified, clarifying, not one voice but several. A low babble punctuated by bursts of that awful laughter, a spectral gathering beneath my floorboards. Clutching the key, a talisman against the encroaching dread, I descended. The murmur swelled, teasing the edge of comprehension, distinct voices weaving an unintelligible tapestry of conversation. Before the threshold, I paused. The padlock felt glacial against my skin. The key jittered violently in my grasp, betraying me twice before finding the lock's receptive darkness. A sharp clack echoed, definitive, irrevocable. Call the authorities? Tell them what? That ghosts were hosting a soiree in my sealed cellar? Madness. I wrenched the padlock away. Its weight was a grounding, terrifying reality. The muffled congress continued within. With my pulse hammering a frantic rhythm against my throat, I twisted the knob. It fought back, stiff with neglect, then surrendered with a groan. The door swung inward, a sigh of trapped air, stale, thick with dust motes and the scent of abandonment, breathed out. I slapped the wall switch. The naked bulb overhead sputtered, casting a sickly yellow sheen onto the wooden steps, plunging into shadow. Now the voices were distinct entities, overlapping, echoing off unseen concrete below. Still the language remained elusive, a phantom tongue. My legs, acting on some primal imperative, carried me downward. Step, groan, step, another groan. Rivulets of sweat traced cold paths down my spine. My breath hitched, shallow and fast. Halfway down the flight, perhaps 10 steps deep, I froze. The voices ceased. Abruptly, silence slammed down, thick and heavy as velvet curtains. My hand clenched the rough wooden railing, knuckles bleaching white. Is anyone there? My voice, thin and reedy, seemed absorbed by the waiting dark. The response was an explosion of sound, that same wild, unmoored laughter, but magnified, deafening, erupting directly beneath my feet. The bare bulb flickered violently, throwing spastic shadows across the grimy walls. I recoiled, scrambling backward up the stairs, heels snagging, pitching me forward onto the steps. Agony flared from my elbow. The laughter pursued, coupled now with the unmistakable thud of heavy footfalls ascending behind me. Terror lent wings. I surged upward, slamming the heavy door shut with a force that rattled the jamb. Fumbling with the padlock, my fingers slick and useless, I dropped it. The doorknob twisted frantically. Something solid thumped against the wood from the other side. The door bucked in its frame. Finally, agonizingly, I secured the shackle. Click. I stumbled back, chest heaving. The assault on the door persisted, shaking, the knob rattling violently, then ceased as suddenly as it began. Silence returned, broken only by the frantic rasp of my own breath and the frantic thumping within my chest. Flight propelled me back to the relative sanctuary of the kitchen. My hand, still shaking, snatched the phone, clumsy digits stabbing at the emergency number. 911, state your emergency. The voice was calm, professional, an anchor in chaos. My basement, I gasped, words tumbling out. Someone's things are in my basement, locked for years, heard them laughing, trying to get out. I relayed the address. The impossible circumstances, the solitude, the sealed cellar. Units are en route, sir, the dispatcher soothed. Remain on the line. Are you secure? Kitchen, doors locked again. Even as the words left my lips, a new horror intruded. A dry, skittering sound. Scratching. From within the walls, like claws on dry plaster. Officers estimate 15 minutes. Sir, can you report any current activity? The scratching intensified, multiplied, spreading like frantic vermin through the house's very skeleton. Floorboards, ceilings, surrounding walls. A legion of unseen things scrabbling just beyond the surface. Scratching. I breathed into the phone, the word barely audible. They're inside the walls, everywhere. The overhead light pulsed. Once, twice, then died. The phone followed suit, its screen blinking into oblivion. Utter blackness enveloped me. The scratching ceased, and in the profound silence that followed, I heard it. Breathing. Labored, wet, muculent inhalations. Not mine. Close. From multiple points in the darkness. All around me. Then the laughter returned. Intimate. Chillingly close. Directly behind my head. Blind panic sent me stumbling through the void. I collided hard with a wall, groped wildly, fingers finding the familiar cold metal of the front doorknob. Wrenching it open, I spilled out into the frigid night air, gasping. Down the long unlit drive, strobing cherries of red and blue sliced through the pines. Salvation approaching. I lurched down the porch steps, collapsing onto the sharp gravel below. But the laughter wasn't contained. It hemorrhaged from the house behind me, a palpable tide of sound pouring from shattered windows, from the gaping doorway, from every seam and fissure. It twisted, blending now with shrieks and guttural howls that scraped against the bounds of human articulation. Tires screamed on gravel as the first cruiser slid to a halt. Officers spilled out, sidearms leveled, beams from their heavy flashlights stabbing into the oppressive dark. "Stay back!" My voice was a raw tear in the night. "Don't go near it!" As if summoned, the house itself seemed to convulse. A cacophony erupted. Every window pane exploded outward in a glittering shower. The exterior walls visibly warped, bulging unnaturally. The front door tore from its frame with a shriek of tortured wood. And from the void within, darkness flowed. Not mere absence of light, but a tangible, coiling blackness. It writhed, ascended, coalescing into a pillar against the night sky. Within its churning depths, faces flickered into being. Visages of nightmare, sporting impossible geometries of eyes, maws splitting into needle-toothed grins. Gunshots cracked, muzzle flashes momentarily illuminating the scene. The bullets vanished into the entity without effect. The faces seemed to find this hilarious, their silent laughter echoing in the soul. Then as swiftly as it manifested, the phenomenon ceased. The darkness imploded, dissipated into nothing. The laughter dwindled to a whisper, then silence. Only the thrum of idling police engines remained. The cellar, when breached by cautious officers, was utterly still. Undisturbed dust coated every surface, save for my own footprints descending halfway down the stairs. Clara's abandoned studio lay exactly as I remembered locking it away 6 years prior. Canvases draped in cobwebs, jars of dried pigment, the faint turpentine ghost lingering in the air. Yet a profound violation had occurred. Her paintings, the ones half-finished on the easels, the vibrant abstracts she was wrestling with when life deserted her, they were gone. Not stolen, erased. Each canvas presented a perfect, unnerving blankness, the gesso ground scrubbed clean of any image, any memory. The official investigation yielded nothing. No forced entry, no rational explanation. They documented my incoherent testimony, swept the woods with flashlights, and filed a report mentioning possible environmental factors. Hallucinogens from mold, perhaps, or a faulty furnace flue. I offered no counter-argument. How could I articulate the truth etched onto those empty canvases, the reality vibrating in the memory of that soul-shredding laughter? I secured the cellar door with a new, heavier padlock, walked to the edge of the woods, and hurled the key deep into the undergrowth. A single suitcase packed, I sought refuge in the anonymous sterility of a motel room. The house went on the market the following morning, but the silence is never complete. In the dead hours, drifting towards sleep, the sound sometimes returns, that wild, ecstatic cacophony, and woven within it, faint but unmistakable, is Clara's voice, not screaming in terror, but whispering my name, an endless, sibilant loop. I never returned. I don't seek answers from that place. Some thresholds are meant to remain uncrossed, some knowledge too costly to acquire. But the entity from the Undercroft, the presence that feasted on color and memory, it hasn't forgotten me. The laughter stalks the edges of my awareness, drawing fractionally nearer each night. Eventually, it will arrive, and in that final confrontation, perhaps I will understand what became of Clara's art, what ancient hunger waited patiently in the dark beneath my home. I only pray I endure the unveiling. The first faint percussion from the rafters, a soft, irregular cadence against the profound hush, announced that this tenure as custodian of my parents' house would deviate sharply from the mundane. That attic portal, perpetually sealed throughout my memory, now guarded a space where something stirred in the nocturnal stillness. I stood on the precipice of understanding why certain thresholds are inviolate. A tranquil week, that was the promise. My parents, finally embarking on their long-dreamed continental sojourn, had entrusted their suburban sanctuary to me. At 25, the urge for illicit festivities had long since faded. Their faith was well placed. Besides, the sprawling quietude offered a welcome reprieve from the constricted reality of my city dwelling. For 2 days, serenity reigned. I tapped away at my remote work in Father's leather-scented study, plundered Mother's meticulously organized larder, and sank into the unfamiliar calm of tree-lined streets. The third night fractured the peace. Engrossed in the flickering narratives of some streaming drama, I registered it, a muffled impact overhead, like a substantial weight relinquished to the floorboards. An old house, I reasoned initially, prone to settling groans and sighs, a relic of the 60s. But the sound repeated, unmistakably followed by the measured tread of footfalls. A frantic drummer took up residence behind my ribs, the attic, forbidden territory, dismissed by my father as a precarious repository of forgotten detritus. Yet irrefutably something navigated its shadowed expanse. I silenced the television, straining into the thickened silence. The steps traced a slow, deliberate path across the ceiling, from eaves to eaves. Then abrupt quietude. Time stretched, taut and fragile as I listened, every nerve alight. Nothing. Eventually, sheer weariness overwhelmed vigilance, pulling me into a restless slumber on the living room sofa. Morning light tried to bleach the night's terrors into mere phantoms of dream. The wind, perhaps, or some errant nocturnal creature breaching the roof space. This flimsy rationalization dissolved as I ascended the main staircase towards the shower. There at the top of the landing, a sight turned the marrow in my bones to ice. The attic door, habitually secured, hung slightly open, a dark wound in the familiar hallway. I paused at the foot of the narrow attic steps, my gaze fixed on that sliver of profound darkness. Primal instinct screamed retreat, urging me to slam it shut, secure it, banish the thought. Yet curiosity, that insidious human imperative, held sway. Drawing a breath that felt thin and inadequate, I began the ascent. Each riser groaned its protest, the sound amplified unnaturally in the house's expectant quiet. Reaching the landing, I hesitated only a heartbeat before nudging the door fully inward. Dim light filtered through a lone, dust-filmed oculus window at the far end, illuminating swirling galaxies of motes in the sunbeam, lending the space a strangely hallowed air. It appeared, at first survey, precisely as my father had portrayed. A neglected cache of skeletal furniture draped in white sheets and stacked cardboard sarcophagi. But as my vision adapted to the Stygian gloom, an anomaly registered. Across the center of the floor, the thick carpet of dust lay disturbed. Footprints marred the gray uniformity. Not animal tracks. Human. My pulse hammered against my temples. I ventured deeper. The prints tracked towards a cluster of boxes huddled in a corner. Approaching, I saw the topmost carton bore signs of recent violation. The packing tape slit raggedly, its cardboard flaps imperfectly reclosed. With hands that trembled, betraying my outward stillness, I lifted the flaps. Within lay albums, thick with photographs, dozens of them. These were not the bright, familiar chronicles of my own upbringing. They were older, steeped in sepia and stark monochrome, populated by faces utterly unknown to me. Extracting one volume, I eased open its stiff cover. The initial image stole my breath. A young woman, scarcely out of her teens, stood posed before this very house. The resemblance was uncanny, startling. My own dark hair, the set of my eyes mirrored back from half a century past. Yet the cut of her dress, the chrome gleam of the automobile behind her, anchored the scene firmly in the 1950s. I turned the brittle pages. More images of this woman, often beside a man I presumed her spouse. Their faces beamed, caught in moments of casual intimacy. But traversing the album's narrative, a disquieting shift occurred. Her smile acquired a strained quality. Her eyes reflected a growing apprehension. In the final few photographs, raw terror stared back from the page, her gaze perpetually skittering towards something just beyond the frame. The last picture chilled me utterly. It depicted the woman standing within this very attic space, her features a rictus of fear, one hand outstretched towards the lens in a gesture of desperate appeal. The album slipped from my nerveless fingers. What history had I unearthed? Who was this spectral doppelganger? As if summoned by my silent query, a floorboard behind me issued a low, protracted creak. I spun, heart leaping into my throat. Materializing from the gloom behind a towering wardrobe was a shape. Nebulous at first, like heat haze shimmering off summer asphalt, it coalesced, solidifying into the distinct figure of a man. Tall, clad in the attire of a bygone decade, he regarded me with a smile, not of welcome, but of chilling, predatory ownership. I stumbled backward, colliding with boxes, frantic to widen the distance. The figure advanced, its locomotion subtly wrong, disjointed. As it drew nearer, the wall behind it became visible. Through its form, a phantasm, I was confronting a ghost. Wheeling around, I fled, tumbling more than running down the narrow stairs. The door slammed shut behind me, the sound echoing my panic. I didn't cease my retreat until I was safely ensconced within my car, the engine roaring to life. Hours bled away as I drove without destination, the rational architecture of my mind struggling to accommodate the impossible vision. When a semblance of coherence returned, I called my parents, the transatlantic connection crackling with my desperation. It required persistent, near-hysterical insistence, but the truth finally spilled forth. The woman in the photographs was Serafina, my grandmother, my biological grandmother. The kindly woman I knew as Gran was, in fact, my father's stepmother. Serafina had vanished without a trace in 1956, shortly after my father's birth. Police inquiries yielded nothing. She was eventually declared deceased. My grandfather remarried years later, forging a pact of silence with his new wife, shielding my father and subsequently me from the family's painful, unresolved past. But their carefully constructed narrative was incomplete. They couldn't fathom the spectral presence inhabiting the attic, the malevolent entity that had clearly tormented Serafina, and now it seemed had turned its attention to me. Returning to the house was unthinkable. Instead, I immersed myself in research, trawling through digitized newspaper archives and county records. I learned that prior to my grandparents' ownership, the house had belonged to a Silas Blackwood. He had met his end within its walls in 1945, under circumstances shrouded in ambiguity. The disparate pieces clicked into a terrifying mosaic. Silas Blackwood, tethered to the place of his demise, had lingered, his spectral influence deepening, turning venomous over the intervening years. He had tormented my grandmother, Serafina, perhaps precipitating her flight, or worse. Now, decades later, sensing my presence, another woman of her lineage within his claimed territory, he had stirred anew. This knowledge is a heavy, useless burden. Revealing the full spectral truth to my parents feels impossible. Their pragmatic minds would reject it. Yet I cannot return to that house. A gnawing anxiety consumes me, anticipating their homecoming. Sometimes in the deepest hours of the night, adrift in the supposed safety of my own apartment, I fancy I hear them, soft, deliberate footfalls that echo from no neighboring unit. And occasionally, flickering at the edge of my vision, a fleeting impression. A tall man in dated clothes, his lips curved in that awful, triumphant smile. I dismiss it as trauma's echo, my psyche projecting phantoms born of shock. Yet a colder certainty resides deep within. Silas Blackwood is not confined to that dusty attic. He has imprinted himself upon me, trailed me back to the city's concrete embrace. Escape feels increasingly illusory, so I wage a futile war against the shadows, leaving lights ablaze through the night, averting my gaze from mirrors and darkened corners. I offer silent, desperate prayers for a way to exorcise this ancestral ghost before he inflicts upon me the same fate that befell Serafina. For I understand now, with chilling clarity, some doors are consecrated to remain sealed, some truths better interred, and sometimes the past refuses to merely haunt memory. It manifests, corporeal and vengeful, wearing a cruel smile and leaving its indelible footprints in the dust of spaces best left undisturbed. That evening remains etched, indelible, against the grain of time. A profound quietude had settled upon the establishment, the low lighting pooling like spilled amber on the venerable floorboards that groaned under our shifting weight. Elias and I, bone-weary from the day's relentless rhythm at the bistro, still faced the final ritual, reconciling the till. No urgency pressed upon us, yet an odd premonition, a subtle insistence in the back of my mind, urged haste. Everything bore an unusual gravity, as if the air itself had thickened, the illumination faltering, insufficient against the encroaching shadows. Solitude amplified every nuance within that historic house. Each trivial sound reverberated through its arteries, the hall swallowing echoes whole. Near the kitchen's threshold, I registered a muffled thud, perhaps twice, but dismissed it, a trick of tired senses. My focus narrowed to the crisp bills and dull coins, a tangible reality I clung to, eager for departure. For half a year, Elias and I had navigated the rhythms of this bistro. The building itself was a local fixture, renowned for its antiquity. It boasted complaining staircases, ancient timber beams overhead, and a warren of peculiar alcoves seemingly devoid of purpose. The proprietor had converted a section of the ground level into the main dining space, annexing a smaller chamber for the kitchen. A long, shadowed corridor snaked past this area, leading towards a dim storage room and several other sealed-off chambers, perpetually unused. Whispers circulated among the staff, fleeting shapes glimpsed at the corridor's terminus, disembodied voices when solitude should have reigned. Some swore the place was imbued with an unseen presence, a haunting. Such notions never resonated with me, raised as I was on pragmatism. My parents preached faith in the observable, cautioning against anxieties born of the inexplicable. The clock hands crept towards 11 that night. An hour had passed since the last patron departed. Our official closing was 10, but lingering to restore order to the dining room or tame the kitchen's aftermath was commonplace. Elias hunched over the register, his fingers methodically sorting currency. I cross-referenced credit card slips against the day's totals. A companionable silence enveloped us, born of exhaustion. The only constants were the distant, low drone of the ancient refrigerator and a faint, electric buzz from the overhead fixtures. Intermittently, the heating system punctuated the quiet with a metallic pop. The day's warmth had surrendered to the night's chill, triggering its automatic response. I recall glancing at Elias, catching his gaze flick towards the corridor branching off to our left. His posture tensed, expectant. He held perfectly still for a beat, then gave a minute shake of his head, resuming his count. "All right there?" I murmured. He offered a non-committal grunt, feigning fatigue, but a tremor in his voice betrayed him. It was then I perceived it too, a delicate, abrasive shk emanating from the kitchen's vicinity. The sound suggested a chair leg dragged reluctantly, briefly, across the wood. I ceased my task, listening intently. Elias and I locked eyes, a silent question passing between us. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. He nodded slowly, setting the bills aside, and gestured for me to follow. We moved with deliberate slowness towards the kitchen entryway. A frantic drumbeat commenced against my ribs. Moisture slicked my palms. I fought the rising panic, reasoning inwardly, uneven floors causing furniture to shift, the old structure groaning under its own weight. Yet the sound had possessed an unnerving intentionality. Not a random settling creak, but a short, sharp scrape, abruptly silenced. Stepping into the kitchen, normalcy greeted us. Chairs were neatly tucked beneath the small break table. Nothing appeared disturbed. Refrigerator doors remained sealed. The sink basin gleamed empty. Countertops were clear. Releasing a held breath, I suggested to Elias it was merely the building settling. We turned, intending to return to the front. That's when the laughter occurred. It wasn't loud, but intimate, immediate. A low guttural chuckle, rasping and dry, seeming to originate mere feet away. It didn't echo. It simply was, present in the air beside us. Elias stared at me, his eyes wide saucers of disbelief. An Arctic current traced my spine, raising the fine hairs on my arms as my stomach clenched into a knot of ice. Genderless, the sound carried a mocking quality, amusement directed at our bewilderment. There was no pause for investigation. Instinct took over. I bolted. Elias pounded close behind. We hurtled towards the front entrance, snatching our phones, bursting into the night air in what felt like seconds. Breath tore raggedly from my lungs, my chest aching with sudden terror. Elias was already dialing, his voice tight, reporting to the police. My gaze remained fixed on the glass door, half expecting a face, a shadow, to materialize in the dimly lit interior. Only darkness stared back, punctuated by the few remaining lights. Stillness. My heart hammered against my ribs, threatening to fracture them. Never had I encountered anything so distinct, so proximate, within an ostensibly empty space. 15 minutes later, patrol car lights painted the street. 2 officers emerged, their expressions professionally neutral as they inquired about the disturbance. Elias recounted hearing laughter inside. I corroborated his statement, my voice still unsteady. Had anyone else possessed a key? No, we confirmed. Only the owner and another manager, both long gone. The officers entered, activating every light switch, their beams probing every recess. They meticulously searched each room, opened closets, verified window locks, even peered into the dusty attic crawlspace above the kitchen. Nothing. No indication of forced entry. No footprints marred the dust in the unused sections. The premises were secure. They weren't dismissive, precisely, but I sensed their conclusion. Overwrought employees, spooked by the groans of an old house. They advised us to lock up securely and head home, instructing us to call again should further incidents occur. The following morning, relating the night's events to our colleagues felt acutely embarrassing. Yet concealment was impossible in the close-knit ecosystem of the bistro staff. News spread rapidly. A few admitted to hearing indistinct voices near that corridor before, attributing them to drafts or the building's eccentricities. Clara, one of our baristas, recounted hearing footsteps traversing the vacant dining area post-closing, despite being certain she'd locked the doors. Another co-worker, Finn, had previously claimed witnessing a chair move unaided near the storage room, a tale largely met with skepticism. After our experience, Elias and I began to reconsider Finn's story. Over the ensuing weeks, Elias and I shared several closing shifts. We attempted normalcy, but as 9 o'clock approached, that familiar tension would coil in my chest. Minor, inexplicable events began to punctuate the routine. Tumblers would inexplicably leap from their perches, not once or twice, but with a frequency that prompted checks of shelf stability and temperature fluctuations, yielding no logical cause. Sometimes, while tidying, I'd catch a sibilant murmur just behind me, wordless yet undeniably present. Turning, I'd find only empty air. There were evenings, particularly when retrieving supplies alone from the pantry, that I felt a prickling sensation of unseen scrutiny. The pantry, a narrow, chilly space adjoining the infamous hallway, always seemed degrees colder than the rest of the building. One evening near closing, I lingered in the back office completing paperwork. Elias was occupied in the kitchen, cleaning surfaces and packing away remaining food items. The rest of the staff had departed earlier due to the slow pace of business. The office door stood ajar, offering a partial view of the corridor if I leaned back. Concentration proved elusive. A persistent jumpiness kept my gaze darting upwards. After several minutes, a faint tap sounded on the wall just outside the office. Not the groan of pipes or settling wood. It distinctly resembled knuckles rapping once on the paneling. A pause, then rapping again. I rose, moving to the doorway, scanning left, then right. Nothing. The hallway stretched vacant under the dim-aged light fixture, shadows pooling thickly in the corners. My pulse quickened. "Elias?" I called out. Silence. Louder this time. "Elias?" Still no reply. Hesitantly, I ventured a few steps down the corridor, reaching the corner that turned towards the storage room. Its door was shut, but a faint rustling whispered from within. Gingerly, I grasped the doorknob and turned. Locked. This was unusual. We rarely secured this door, needing access throughout the day. Feeling foolish, I knocked lightly, needing to confirm Elias wasn't somehow inside. No answer came. The rustling ceased. As I started to turn away, Elias's voice sounded from behind me, approaching from the kitchen, asking why I'd called. I nearly levitated with shock. Spinning around, I hissed for him to join me. Together, we tried the storage room door again, still securely locked. We fumbled through our keys, but none engaged the lock. We'd never needed to lock it, thus never identified the correct key. Elias swore he hadn't touched the door all evening. We stood perplexed for a moment when, abruptly, the brass knob vibrated violently, a frantic metallic clatter shattering the quiet, as if someone inside were struggling with the latch. My stomach lurched. My hands began to tremble. Elias's face blanched. He seized my arm, pulling me back slightly. We stared, transfixed at the doorknob, anticipating its turn. Then absolute silence descended once more. Elias cautiously reached out, testing the handle again. Immovable. Overwhelmed by a sudden chilling fear, we retreated from the hallway, returning swiftly to the front, extinguishing necessary lights and securing the main entrance. Sleep offered little refuge that night, the phantom rattle of the doorknob echoing in my mind. Days later, I recounted these accumulating experiences to our manager, Naomi. She admitted somewhat reluctantly that staff had quit previously, citing discomfort within the building. She added that the owner remained tight-lipped on the subject, though she harbored suspicions about the property's history. Elias proposed research. We scoured online archives, uncovering references to a family residing there in the late 19th century, but no specific accounts of tragedy or crime emerged. No newspaper articles detailed accidents or events that might offer an explanation for the strangeness. A local blog posited the house stood upon the foundations of an even older structure, yet provided no concrete evidence. At the bistro, the phenomena persisted, always favoring moments of quietude during closing procedures or when an employee found themselves alone in the rear sections. I began to notice a pattern. The occurrences seemed concentrated around the kitchen-adjacent hallway, the artery leading to the storage room, pantry, and the two neglected chambers. Staff increasingly avoided this area solo. Clara started requesting my company whenever retrieving supplies, confessing to feeling watched each time she passed that corridor. One evening, Elias and I found ourselves staying late once more, compelled by the necessity of a thorough inventory. We resolved to remain together. Clipboard in hand, we moved through the silent building, counting stock. The dining area lay submerged in darkness, but we kept lights active in the kitchen and corridor to navigate. My heart maintained an elevated tempo throughout. I braced constantly for the return of that disembodied laughter, the tapping on the walls. Elias, too, was palpably on edge, his head swiveling frequently, peering around corners as if expecting an encounter. We completed the inventory without major incident. As we prepared to head back towards the front, a muffled voice sounded near the pantry. I froze mid-stride. Elias halted beside me. It resembled a single word, low and guttural, like someone muttering under their breath, yet indecipherable. Taking a tentative step forward, the sound vanished. I pushed open the pantry door, flicking on the weak bulb inside. Shelves laden with canned goods, coffee sacks, sugar bins, and sundries lined the narrow space. Nothing seemed amiss. No one was visible. No further sound broke the silence. Elias entered behind me, staying close. We stood for several heartbeats, acutely aware of our own breathing, straining to detect any movement. Nothing. As we turned to exit, something brushed distinctly against my leg. A fleeting, phantom caress against my calf, like a tug on my trousers. A startled yelp escaped me as I lurched forward, colliding with Elias. He caught my arm, steadying us both as we stumbled. I whirled around, aiming my phone's flashlight at the floor. Empty space. "Okay," Elias whispered, his voice tight. I stammered that something had touched me. He believed me instantly, having witnessed my visceral reaction. That was our limit for the night. We locked up with trembling hands and departed into the cool air just after midnight. Such incidents continued sporadically. A colleague might report a phantom voice. A small object might shift or fall without cause. Logical explanations remained elusive. I persisted at the job, tethered by necessity and a genuine camaraderie with my co-workers, despite the pervasive, unnerving tension. Elias remained too, perhaps driven by a curiosity that wrestled with his fear. We occasionally discussed leaving, but a shared stubbornness kept us anchored, at least for the time being. I still work within those aged walls. The building remains unchanged, so too do the strange visitations. The owner maintains a resolute silence. Consequently, some nights pass in uneventful quiet. On others, doors latch themselves, voices murmur in empty rooms, or that faint, chilling laughter drifts from the corridor. I've adapted, managing the fear through vigilance and proximity to Elias whenever possible. Yet apprehension invariably tightens its grip whenever I step into that hallway after hours. My muscles tense, my mouth dries. Sometimes a tremor runs through my hands, accompanied by gooseflesh prickling my arms. I possess no answers. Whether it's elaborate trickery, echoes of a troubled past, or something entirely other, I cannot say. All I know is that when those sounds manifest, when that cold touch grazes my skin, reason fails me. It fails Elias. It fails my colleagues. We secure the doors, count the earnings, and expedite our departure. Lingering in the back rooms, investigating nocturnal noises. These are luxuries we no longer afford ourselves. Survival lies in swiftness and awareness. That insidious chuckle, reverberating in the kitchen's stillness, remains a phantom echo in the chambers of my memory. A stark reminder that certain places harbor secrets impervious to explanation, however diligently sought. And with every anomalous sound that fractures the quiet of that old house, I question if true ease will ever settle within its walls again. A peculiar gravity always pulled Elias towards structures surrendered to time, their skeletal remains whispering forgotten narratives. Blackwood Sanatorium, perched vulture-like on the town's periphery, was the ultimate siren call. A name spoken in lowered tones, wrapped in chilling anecdotes of ephemeral sights and phantom sounds. Folklore Elias, a staunch disciple of the tangible, dismissed as frayed nerves and overactive imaginations. He required the testimony of his own senses. The night he chose was brittle with frost, the air stagnant beneath a sky bruised purple-black, swallowing the moonlight whole. Leaving his vehicle nestled discreetly amongst roadside weeds some distance away, Elias approached on foot, his breath pluming white. Blackwood hunched before him, a colossal silhouette against the starless void, its jagged rows of broken windows like vacant eyes. Ivy tendrils, thick as serpents, strangled the crumbling brickwork. A labyrinthine giant, long surrendered to decay. He found purchase on a fractured sill, easing himself through a gaping wound in the glass, and dropped into the belly of the beast. Inside, the air hung heavy, a tangible shroud thick with the cloying perfume of mildew and something acrid, medicinal. A cold deeper than the season permeated the space, unnatural, bone-leeching. Silence reigned, absolute and profound, a vacuum that seemed to press inwards, as if the sanatorium itself held its breath, listening. Elias ignited his torch, its beam slicing through the gloom, illuminating a blizzard of disturbed dust motes. The floor crunched underfoot, a mosaic of shattered tiles, splintered furniture legs, and yellow documents scattered like fallen leaves after a storm. He navigated the ruin with careful steps, each tread amplified in the resonant stillness. Past examination chambers stripped bare, administrative offices spilling their forgotten secrets, a waiting area where phantom anxieties still seemed to linger in the arrangement of overturned chairs. Relics of hurried departure lay everywhere. Rusted gurneys tilted askew, glass vials crunching underfoot, faded public health warnings peeling from damp-stained walls like sunburned skin. Penetrating deeper into the hospital's labyrinthine core, the unnatural chill intensified, coalescing into a palpable sense of unease that prickled along Elias's spine. The silence shifted, acquiring a watchful quality, a tension that suggested more than mere emptiness. He found himself traversing a long shadowed corridor where paint blistered and peeled from the walls in leprous patches. Faded signage, barely legible, hinted at destinations: radiology, maternity, surgical ward. It was the latter repository of the most lurid local tales that drew him onward. Then a sound, faint, furtive, a dry skittering like brittle paper dragged across concrete. Elias froze, extinguishing his torch, every nerve straining in the absolute darkness. Silence rushed back in, thick and suffocating, broken only by the frantic thrumming in his own chest. The wind sighing through broken panes, timbers groaning under the weight of years. Rational explanations felt thin, inadequate against the sudden, chilling certainty of presence. The surgical wing was a realm of deeper shadows, its windows coated in decades of grime that filtered the meager ambient light into a murky, underwater gloom. Another corridor stretched ahead, flanked by smaller chambers, each dominated by a stark metal operating table. Cabinets lined the walls, some gaping open, spilling unseen contents. Here and there, stained, desiccated linens clung to the tables like shrouds. The corroded outlines of forgotten instruments lay scattered nearby, dulled by rust and time. Elias pushed open a creaking door, sweeping his torch beam across the interior. Dust lay like gray snow on every surface. He played the light across the central table, its stainless steel surface filmed with grime, and his breath hitched. There, stark against the gray film, was a handprint. Not ancient, not faded, but fresh. Small, undeniably a child's print, the fingers slightly dragged as if in motion or pain. Elias stood rooted, the beam trembling, his pulse hammering against his ribs. An animal? A stray cat seeking shelter? The thought dissolved instantly. The print was too precise, too tragically human. He retreated from the room, heart hammering, his torch beam frantically probing the shadowed corners of the corridor. Empty, silent. Yet the sensation of being observed intensified, a prickling awareness on the nape of his neck. He turned, resolved to abandon this wing, this entire cursed edifice, but a sound arrested him. Whispers, faint, sibilant, seeming to emanate from further down the hall, just beyond a bend. Less than sound, more a vibration felt in the bones, urgent, pleading, yet utterly indecipherable. Against every screaming instinct for self-preservation, Elias found himself drawn towards it, the torch quivering in his grip like a captured bird. He rounded the corner. Utter silence crashed down, absolute and heavy. His light sliced through the darkness, revealing nothing but more derelict doorways and deepening gloom. A visceral cold snaked down his spine. He began to back away, slowly, deliberately, when it came again. That dry, shuffling scrape. Closer this time. Behind him. He whirled, torch beam stabbing down the length of the corridor he'd just traversed. Nothing. Only the cold, the dust, the suffocating stillness. Panic flared. Elias broke into a stumbling walk, then a clumsy run, his footfalls cannoning through the vast emptiness. The conviction of being pursued, of something unseen pacing him just beyond the periphery of his light, was now absolute. Fear coiled in his gut, cold and sharp. He burst back into the main foyer, the exit, that violated window, almost within reach. Then drifting through the cavernous space came a sound that froze the marrow in his bones. Laughter. A child's laughter. Soft, melodic, yet utterly misplaced, echoing with a chilling resonance. He stopped dead, muscles locked, mind scrambling for logic where none existed. Impossible. The laughter chimed again, nearer now, seeming to dance towards him from the deeper darkness. He stumbled backwards, the torch beam jittering wildly across the peeling walls, the debris-strewn floor. His limbs felt leaden, unresponsive. Then a flicker of movement at the edge of his vision. He snapped his head towards the far end of the hall. A shape stood there, small, indistinct in the pervasive gloom, little more than a column of denser shadow, yet unmistakably child-sized, motionless, watching. Elias took another involuntary step back. The figure remained still, its presence radiating an unnerving stillness. And then, subtly, its silhouette seemed to incline, a slight tilt of the head, conveying an impossible sense of ancient curiosity, of patient expectation. Reason shattered. Elias turned and fled. Sheer animal terror propelled him, his lungs burning, his frantic footsteps echoing like drum beats through the hollow halls. He didn't dare glance back, didn't pause, launching himself through the broken window frame and tumbling out into the blessedly cold night air. He sucked it in ragged gasps, the frost biting his throat. He scrambled towards his car, keys rattling in his violently trembling hand, fumbling with the lock. Inside, engine roaring, tires spitting gravel. He sped away from Blackwood Sanatorium, forcing his gaze forward, refusing the urge to check the rear-view mirror. Days have bled into nights since Elias fled that husk of suffering. Yet the sanatorium refuses to remain behind. The image of that small, waiting shadow burns behind his eyelids in the dark. And sometimes, adrift in the deepest quiet of his own home, he catches it, or imagines he does. The faintest echo of sibilant whispering, a psychic residue, a memory that breathes. No preamble, no grand narrative arc. Just the raw sequence of what transpired on that desolate ribbon of asphalt. Years I've spent astride my machine, solitude my preferred companion. The engine's thrum, a solitary heartbeat in the vast quiet. That's my solace. But one particular night, the quiet curdled, and I rode straight into something nameless. The clock was nudging 3 a.m. Hours had bled away on a seldom-traveled route, a path I'd never witnessed bearing traffic, not even under the midday sun. A sudden biting cold seized the air, needling my exposed neck, creeping under my jacket cuffs. No wind stirred. The world held its breath in a sepulchral stillness. My headlamp carved a lonely tunnel through absolute black. Miles unfurled behind me, devoid of house glow or the lonely beacon of a gas station. Ahead, a colossal bank of fog loomed, an opaque cliff face swallowing the road. Prudence demanded I ease back on the throttle, visibility dissolving into nothingness. The moment I breached the wall, dampness became a tangible presence, clinging like a shroud to my leather. Microscopic beads jeweled my visor. High beams merely reflected a blinding white glare, forcing a switch to the low, inadequate glow. Beneath my tires, the tarmac felt treacherous, slick with unseen moisture. A knot tightened low in my gut. Fog alone rarely unnerved me, but this was no ordinary mist. It possessed a peculiar, suffocating density. My headlights' beams struggled, penetrating mere feet into the oppressive gray that enveloped everything. Then a cough from the engine, A tremor vibrated through the handlebars, clutched in my grip. Initially, I dismissed it. Moisture in the wiring, perhaps? A minor gremlin? But the sputtering persisted, grew ragged. My bike, a steadfast companion for countless miles, sounded distressed, laboring against an unseen force. A glance at the gauges revealed nothing amiss, yet the engine stuttered, threatening to stall. And then, silence. It died utterly. The console lights winked out, plunging me into a deeper darkness punctuated only by the failing headlamp beam. Fear, cold and sharp, finally pierced my composure. I thumbed the starter. A futile click, a brief mechanical whir, then nothing. My own pulse hammered a frantic rhythm against my temples. Kickstand down. Boots met wet asphalt. A tremor, unrelated to the cold, traced its way up my spine. Logic wrestled with instinct. Wait for morning, for the fog to perhaps relinquish its hold. Yet something felt intrinsically wrong about this vaporous prison. It felt heavy, actively pressing inward. I decided to muscle the bike toward the shoulder. The machine's dead weight strained my arms. The fog crowded close, visibility reduced to arm's length. My own breathing sounded unnaturally loud, each exhalation a fleeting cloud within the greater miasma. Bike parked, ignition cycled off, then on again. A flicker of life on the console, instantly extinguished. The engine remained stubbornly inert. A faint scraping noise whispered from behind, like a boot sole dragged reluctantly across pavement. I spun, eyes straining against the monochrome veil. Only indistinct shapes shifted within the gray, heart thudding against my ribs. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding thin, swallowed by the fog. "Anyone there?" The echo returned, mocking, then a murmur, unintelligible, seeming to drift on the damp air. Gooseflesh prickled my arms. Despite the chill, sweat beaded beneath my jacket. An animal, I reasoned desperately. A stray creature disoriented by the mist. But the cadence of the steps felt undeniably human. My fingers fumbled in my pocket, closing around a small flashlight. I clicked it on. Its beam sliced a weak path a few yards ahead, illuminating nothing definitive. That dragging footfall resumed, seeming to circle me now, always just beyond the edge of sight. "Who's out there?" I shouted, louder this time. Silence answered, followed by another soft shuffle and a low whisper that seemed to emanate from directly behind me. I whirled again, empty gray. A constricting tightness seized my chest, my lungs struggling for air. Each breath felt shallow, sharp. Panic flared. Leave the bike. Walk. But walk where? The last town lay a daunting 30 miles back. Ahead, only unknown fog-shrouded road. My watch face glowed, nearly 3:15 a.m. Dawn remained hours away. Decision made. Push the bike. Walk it forward until I found somewhere, anywhere, marginally safer. Perhaps the engine might miraculously revive. Perhaps the fog might thin. Grasping the heavy handlebars, I began the slow, arduous trek. The asphalt felt uneven beneath my boots. Maintaining balance required concentration, and as I moved, the fog seemed to intensify, coiling tighter. My flashlight beam began to scatter back, almost blinding. More footsteps now, plural, sometimes distant, sometimes disconcertingly near. A low, continuous muttering joined the soundscape, like fragmented conversations just below the threshold of understanding. My nerves frayed, each forward step a monumental effort. 10 minutes, perhaps, of this grueling progress. The bike's headlight flickered erratically, a brief weak illumination, then darkness again, a surge of hope. I tried the starter once more. Futile. The lights died completely. A frustrated sigh escaped me, misting in the cold air. I kept pushing. To the side of the road, a faint anomaly in the gloom. A small area where the fog seemed less dense, almost a clearing. I steered the bike towards it, shoulders screaming, arms aching. My boots slipped on the slick surface. My hands grew numb, gripping the bars. Reaching the spot, I found a patch of gravel. I parked the bike again, leaning against it, trying to gather my scattered thoughts. The fog eddied around this small pocket of relative clarity. Movement flickered at the edge of my vision, to the left. A vague silhouette, human-sized, utterly still. I snapped the flashlight beam towards it. Nothing, just swirling gray. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, turned the light off, then on again, questioning my senses. Still nothing. My throat felt parched, constricted. Swallowing brought no relief. Then distinctly the sound of heavy, labored breathing directly behind me. I spun around, heart leaping. The clearing remained empty. I paced a small, tight circle, eyes darting, trying to cover every angle. The breathing intensified for a heartbeat, then vanished as if switched off. My pulse roared in my ears, which began to ring. Tension knotted my neck muscles. The feeling of being watched became palpable, oppressive. Forward again. There was no other option. But as I moved, the fog retaliated, thickening instantly, swirling in disorienting patterns, threatening to erase the road itself. I fumbled for a rag, wiped my visor clear, only for the moisture to return immediately. The humidity was stifling now, incongruous with the chill. Sweat prickled my forehead. The temperature seemed to plummet further. Each breath rasped in my throat. My legs felt stiff, leaden. Every time I glanced up from the handlebars, I caught fleeting glimpses. Something peripheral, indistinct. Once a flash of a pale face, distorted, skin stretched taut like old parchment. A blink, and the fog consumed it. The tightness in my chest returned. A shaky gasp escaped my lips. My hands trembled. Fatigue, I told myself. Tricks of the light, frayed nerves. But the conviction wouldn't take root. A wet, dragging scrape erupted to my right. A few seconds, then silence. Head snapped right. Flashlight beam cut empty space. The sound repeated, now on my left. The hairs on my nape prickled. Nausea churned in my stomach. Ignore it, I commanded myself. Keep moving. But the sound persisted, advancing, retreating, switching sides. A tormenting, auditory shell game. My knuckles whitened, gripping the handlebars until they ached. Somehow, I covered more ground. Time warped in the fog. My watch seemed to crawl, mocking me with its slow procession of minutes that felt like hours. I reached another small patch where the mist seemed thinner, revealing a large crack snaking across the asphalt, filled with pooled water. My flashlight beam reflected weakly off the surface, and in that reflection, stark against the murk, stood a figure. I pivoted instantly, light beam sweeping. Nothing there. I checked the puddle again. The reflection was empty. My chest felt brittle, ready to shatter. The noises escalated. Whispers grew louder, closer, yet still maddeningly indistinct. Sometimes like a hushed, urgent argument, other times devolving into low, mournful groans. Step by painstaking step, I pressed onward. Boots squelched. Jacket felt waterlogged, heavy. Breath fogged my visor. I flipped it up, welcoming the cold shock of air on my face. A glance down the road, another fleeting image. A twisted visage, eyes like empty sockets, mouth agape in a silent scream. Flashlight beam stabbed forward. It vanished. Heart hammered. Body shook uncontrollably. Curses tumbled from my lips. Small, futile sounds lost in the vast grayness. The urge to abandon the bike, to simply run blindly into the fog, was overwhelming. But reason, however frayed, held sway. Run where? To what? My phone, checked earlier, remained useless. No signal bars. Forward or back were the only choices. Turning back felt viscerally wrong. The fog behind seemed to possess an even greater density, a palpable pressure against my back, warning me away. So, forward it had to be, fueled by a desperate need to escape this suffocating nightmare. Boots splashed through unseen puddles. Denim clung damply to my ankles. Water dripped from my jacket. My arms were numb, jello. My lower back screamed in protest. Ahead, slightly to the right, a faint luminescence, different from my flashlight's beam, a weak, yellowish glow. Hope surged. Step by agonizing step, I strained towards it. As I drew nearer, it flickered, then winked out. A mirage, a trick of the fog. Just then a loud shuffle erupted from that exact spot. I froze, flashlight aimed like a weapon. Only swirling gray emptiness met the beam. Heart threatened to batter its way out of my chest. Palms slick with cold sweat. Breath coming in ragged gasps. "Leave me alone," I whispered, unsure if I addressed man or phantom. No trouble here. Only the distant, sibilant murmuring answered. A few more tentative steps. Peripheral movement again. Something tall. A roadside tree. I swept the light. No trees. Only those swirling amorphous shapes within the mist. One coalesced briefly into a featureless head before dissolving back into the roiling mass. My eyes burned from the strain. A wave of dizziness washed over me. A leg muscle spasmed uncontrollably. A hollow ache bloomed in my chest. My throat felt impossibly tight. Escape. I needed to escape. One last desperate attempt at ignition. Key turned. Console lights flared momentarily, then died. I kicked the foot pedal in sheer frustration, the metallic clang echoing unnaturally loud in the stillness. The whispers abruptly ceased, as if startled. Then they resumed, lower, more urgent. Focus, I told myself. Focus on the practical. Watch check, 4 a.m. An hour trapped in this purgatory, though it felt like an eternity. Dawn felt impossibly far off. I couldn't wait. Pushing forward was the only way. Arms numb, back protesting, I forced myself onward. The footsteps returned, phantom companions matching my stride, always just beyond the light's feeble reach. My flashlight began to fade noticeably, the beam weakening, flickering. I tapped it against my palm, a useless gesture. It dimmed further. Panic surged anew. Losing the light meant total blindness. Suddenly my boot caught the edge of a pothole. I stumbled violently, bike lurching, nearly going down. I somehow wrestled it upright, but a searing pain shot up my leg, twisted ankle. Cursing through gritted teeth, I halted, leaning the bike on its stand, bracing myself against it, gasping for breath. My ankle throbbed mercilessly. Every muscle screamed with tension. The fog felt like a physical weight, a sodden blanket smothering me, isolating me in a world devoid of anything familiar. Seconds later, a low groan sounded nearby, to my left. Movement again in the corner of my eye, head snapped around, fog impenetrable. My own ragged breathing filled the silence. The skin on my arms crawled, scalp tingled. A shape seemed to detach itself from the mist, moving closer. I raised the dying flashlight. "Stay back!" I yelled, voice cracking. A faint, chilling hiss answered, tightening my jaw. Then the shape seemed to recoil, melting back into the gray. I couldn't wait here. Gripping the handlebars, I pushed off, limping, biting back cries of pain. My ankles screamed with every agonizing step. Sweat streamed down my face, mingling with the cold condensation. Breathing became shallow, desperate. Thought narrowed to a single imperative. Move. The road began to curve. I followed its unseen bend, praying for a reprieve. And as I rounded it, relief washed over me in a dizzying wave. The fog was thinning. Hallelujah, it was thinning. The dark outlines of trees materialized on either side. The road ahead opened up. My faltering flashlight beam reached further. Ignoring the fire in my ankle, I pushed faster, the bike suddenly feeling lighter. The shapes in the mist receded. The murmurs faded to silence. A few more yards, and I emerged into relative clarity. Visibility stretched 100 feet or more. The sky above held the faintest promise of pre-dawn light. No figures, no watchers. Just me, the bike, and the blessedly empty road. One more turn of the key. A cough, a sputter. Then the engine roared to glorious life. A choked laugh escaped me, half sob, half elation. I swung my leg over, ignoring the throbbing ankle, revved the engine hard. It caught, faltered, then held steady. Behind me, the fog bank lingered, a solid, unmoving wall across the asphalt, seeming to watch, reluctant to release its prey. I twisted the throttle, the bike surged forward. I didn't look back. My head pounded, eyes watering from the wind and the relief. But I pushed the machine harder, faster, devouring the miles. Escape. That was the only thought. Flee the gray nightmare. Minutes later, the fog was a distant memory swallowed by the receding darkness. The sky bled gray, then bruised purple, then pink. The road stretched clear and blessedly normal ahead. I risked one glance over my shoulder. The fog bank remained, a static, ominous presence straddling the road far behind. Then my eyes fixed forward, focused only on the horizon, on putting as much distance as possible between myself and that place. My heart still hammered, residual tremors shaking my arms, but I rode on. What resided in that fog? What malevolent intelligence gave it that hostile weight? I possess no neat theories, no tidy explanations. The faces remained indistinct, the voices never resolved into words. But the sounds, the chilling presence, the suffocating dread, those were undeniably real. Luck, timing, sheer will, perhaps some combination allowed my escape. But that particular stretch of road is now forbidden territory, excised from my mental map. This isn't embellishment. It's the unvarnished memory, The scrape of my boots, the sibilant hiss from the gray depths, the cold knot that still forms in my stomach at the recollection. I seek neither belief nor pity. I simply needed to unburden myself of this weight. So, if your travels lead you to a curtain of fog on a lonely road deep in the night, consider turning back. I know I would. A cloying sweetness, edged with something sharp, metallic, the complementary nectar of arrival. Recognition, cold and absolute, bloomed too late. My world swam, edges dissolving into watercolor bleeds, limbs turned to anchors. Through the distortion I saw them, the resort attendants, welcoming masks melted, revealing the predatory vacancy beneath. Paradise had just bared its teeth. Months of scrimping crystallized into this single, impossible chance. The azure haven, a jewel flung onto a turquoise shore, offered at a price that whispered, trap. We swallowed the bait, Clara and I. Sun hammered the tarmac as surf sighed against the sand. Inside, cool marble breathed under a chandelier dripping crystal light. Then came the welcome, proffered in slender glasses, liquid sapphire. Our signature blend, a hostess murmured, a taste of the island. Delicious, yes, but a phantom bitterness lingered, a dissonant note I foolishly ignored. Exotic, I told myself. Their service impeccable yet unsettlingly intense, smiles fixed, gazes clinging like humidity. Polished professionalism, I reasoned then. Oh, the blindness of desire. Our suite defied belief. Acres of crisp linen, a balcony gulping down the ocean view, a bathroom vast enough to echo. We wandered through Eden that first day, shimmering pools mirroring the sky, a crescent of private sand, dining options promising untold delights. But by evening, a fog descended. Thoughts swam sluggishly, limbs obeyed with reluctance. Clara confessed a similar lethargy. The flight, we agreed, the equatorial sun. We surrendered early to the silken sheets, blaming the journey, not the destination. Dawn brought intrusion. A uniformed figure stood sentinel by the mini fridge. Refilling, his smile was a painted rictus. My question met only that silent, unwavering curve before he retreated. Breakfast was a tableau of the uncanny. Other patrons drifted, marionettes with vacant stares. Their movements languid, their eyes filmed over. I attempted conversation. Platitudes about the resort's perfection spilled out, hollow and rehearsed. Turning to Clara, ready to voice the rising dread, I found her gaze lost in the depths of her coffee cup. Clara. My touch on her arm. She looked up, and the world tilted. Her eyes held the same empty sheen, the same terrifying absence. Panic seized my throat. I mumbled an excuse. Air. I needed air. Fleeing the dining room's quiet horror, I navigated the opulent lobby, a gilded cage. A sliver of darkness beckoned. Personnel only, the sign read, the door imperfectly latched. A furtive glance, then I was through. Opulence vanished, replaced by sterile functionality. A corridor stretched beneath buzzing fluorescent tubes, cold and utilitarian. Muffled voices drew me forward, a moth to a poisoned flame. Closer, closer. Subject Group Delta shows optimal absorption. A male voice, clipped, devoid of warmth. Initiate Phase 2 protocol by Aero 800. A woman's crisp reply. Affirmative. The consortium anticipates delivery. This iteration surpasses previous yields significantly. consortium? Yields? Bile rose in my throat. Heart hammering, I risked a look. A chamber of horrors unfolded. Rows of occupied beds, figures still as death beneath crisp white sheets. Attendants in lab coats moved among them like priests of some profane ritual, tending to humming machines and intravenous lines, snaking into passive flesh. A gasp, perhaps? A shuffle of foot? Every head snapped towards me. The painted smiles evaporated, leaving behind expressions of chilling appraisal. Ah, an unscheduled observer. The woman, Dr. Eris Thorne, her badge proclaimed, stated her voice like chipped ice. Secure the asset. Instinct screamed flight, but my body betrayed me, weighed down by the insidious welcome gift. The sterile corridor became a tunnel of lead. Hands clamped onto me before I'd taken 10 paces, hauling me back towards the grotesque theater. They bound me to an empty gurney, my struggles futile against their practiced efficiency. Dr. Thorne approached, a hypodermic glinting under the harsh lights. "A pity," she mused, almost conversationally. "You could have enjoyed the amenities. Now your participation commences somewhat prematurely." The needle bit deep, releasing fire into my veins. Reality warped, sound smeared, vision fractured. What is this?" I forced the words past a thickening tongue. Her smile resurfaced, a surgeon's detached curve. "Progress, my dear Leo. Neuroenhancement, accelerated adaptation, biointegration. Our fortunate guests provide invaluable data." The world snapped back into focus. I lay in the opulent bed, Clara breathing softly beside me. A nightmare? Relief warred with a chilling certainty. Then I saw it. The small, angry red mark on my forearm. Undeniable proof. I shook Clara, gently at first, then with rising urgency. Her eyes fluttered open, clouded, then mercifully cleared with recognition. "Clara, listen," I hissed, the story tumbling out in a desperate whisper. Doubt flickered in her eyes, then yielded to dawning horror. I thought they were just strange dreams," she stammered. "But yesterday, it's mostly blank." No more words needed. We moved with frantic stealth, throwing belongings into bags, the silence thick with terror. The door swung open onto a waiting attendant, smile fixed, eyes like chips of obsidian. "Leaving so soon?" His voice dripped false bonhomie. "Just an early stroll." I managed my voice tight. He nodded slowly, murmuring into a concealed radio as we edged past. We forced casualness, crossing the vast lobby under unseen surveillance, each step leaden. Freedom beckoned, the towering glass doors. Then, shattering the morning calm, an alarm shrieked. "Alert! Containment breach! Sector Gamma!" A disembodied voice echoed. Pretense incinerated. We bolted. Shouts erupted behind us, the thud of running feet gaining. Across the sun-drenched car park, a taxi disgorged new arrivals, fresh lambs for the slaughter. Without thought, I wrenched open the rear door, shoving Clara inside. "Go!" I screamed at the bewildered driver. "Now, get us out of here!" Perhaps it was the terror in my eyes, or the sight of uniformed figures converging, but he needed no further urging. Tires screamed, the engine roared, and the azure haven receded behind us, a beautiful lie shrinking in the rearview mirror. We clung together, adrenaline singing in our veins, gasping for breath on the winding coastal highway. We spilled our frantic story to impassive officials in the nearest city. Disbelief met our words. The reputation of the Azure Haven stood fortress-like against the claims of two traumatized tourists. By the time inquiries were tentatively made, the resort stood empty, a hollow monument on a deserted beach. Staff, guests, equipment, all evaporated as if into the tropical air. Months bled into a cycle of medical examinations. Doctors found anomalous biochemical markers, untraceable compounds whispering of violation, but offered no prognosis, no cure. The long-term ledger remains terrifyingly blank. Sleep offers no refuge. I revisit the sterile lab, the cold gaze of Dr. Thorne, the needle's bite. Clara sometimes drifts, her eyes momentarily losing focus, acquiring that terrifyingly placid sheen we saw in the others. Brief, chilling echoes of her captivity. Recovery feels like a distant shore we may never reach. Yet we speak. We recount the horror veiled in luxury, the nightmare packaged as paradise. So heed this echo of our ordeal, when confronted with perfection priced as a steal, with welcoming smiles that seem too bright. Look closer. Question the nectar offered freely. Some heavens are merely elaborate cages, and the cost of entry is far more than you can ever afford.